Welcome to the PDB Situation Report. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. All right, let's get briefed. Today, we're wading into a topic that we really don't often cover here on the PDB, and that would be domestic U.S. politics. With the 2024 election on the horizon, you may have heard about it. One thing is certain. A new president in 2025 will bring significant changes to America's foreign policy. Well, perhaps. To break down what those shifts could look like, we're joined by former CIA officer and co-host of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. Of course, I'm talking about my good friend, Buck Sexton, and he'll have his insights and information and wisdom. Later in the show, Chinese President Xi Jinping, well, he's not a guest on our show, but we're talking about him. He was in Russia this week, participating in the annual BRICS Summit. Now, this comes a week after his nation encircled the island nation of Taiwan with warships and fighter jets during a provocative military exercise meant to demonstrate its power. Gordon Chang, author of the new book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, will stop by to give his analysis. But first, today's PDB Spotlight. We're now less than 2 weeks away from the U.S. presidential election. Can it get here any sooner? And the race is tightening. Polls show Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump in a virtual tie, though the momentum currently seems to be swinging in Trump's favor. The two candidates bring, well, let's call them vastly different approaches to both foreign and domestic policy. Under the Biden-Harris administration, illegal immigration, of course, has surged, with millions crossing the southern border. Meanwhile, abroad, the war in Ukraine drags into its third year, and the conflict in Gaza threatens to escalate into a broader regional war. Of course, Trump has promised to return to stricter border policies and stem the surge of illegal migration. And overseas, well, the former president asserts that his administration would bring an end to the Ukraine war and ease tensions in the Middle East. But he's offered few specifics on how he plans to achieve that. So, with two very different visions for America's future on the line, the question is, which approach will resonate more with voters as we inch closer to Election Day? And will Trump's promises of restoring order at home and abroad be enough? Joining me now is the co-host of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show, former CIA officer Buck Sexton. Hey, man, listen, thank you very much for taking the time to be here on the Situation Report.
I'm honored to be here with you. I got to say, Mike Baker, it's like 007 and Casey Kasem come together, man. You know, you got the voice, but you got the 007. I love it.
Yeah, I'm hoping they're going to reboot, Scooby-Doo, and I'll be able to do the voiceover on that, because that, as far as I was concerned, was Casey's biggest gig. Okay, so we got a lot to cover, right? But first, yeah. I think we got to get to your P. Diddy story.
I can't believe you're throwing me under the bus like that. By the way, no matter what I say here, we're going to get into serious stuff. No matter what I say, just the fact that we're launching in with a Buck's P. Diddy story is just kind of like, that's the headline. Okay, here is my P. Diddy story.
Let me just, for those listening and viewing, and we have wonderful viewers and listeners here. Let me just explain that we were in the green room before we started this show, eating lobster and truffles. And Buck says, "Hey, I got a P. Diddy story."
I do. No,
how am I not? How am I not going to follow up on that? So the floor is yours.
So look, I'm a young guy, and all of a sudden I get an invite. No, I'm just kidding. I was like I want to say a freshman in high school age, and I grew up on 75th Street in New York City. It was a nice building. It was a very nice neighborhood, just in case anyone's like, oh. And sure enough, there was like this whole scuttlebutt, if you will, that said P. Diddy has bought the building next door. So I'm like and this is when P. Diddy is at his absolute sort of peak of the music. It's like, 1997, 98, right? So it's like post death of Biggie Smalls. And I'm like, wait a second, P. Diddy is going to be living right next to me now in high school, like right next door. And yeah, he lived at 813 Park Avenue, and I lived at 815 Park Avenue as a kid. And I remember there would be a baby blue Bentley that was a convertible with cream interior. It was like the fanciest car I'd ever seen, just sitting there outside for him with the biggest security guards I had ever seen, like in my life. I mean, dudes who looked like they could have been starting, and probably were starting linemen in the NFL. So I used
Wow.
to see him regularly all when I was in high school. I mean, I probably bumped into Pete Diddy's crew on the street in front of my building, I don't know, 50 times. It was just like a regular thing.
Good
And we were
God.
all like, oh man,
Did
like
you ever did you
big music star.
did you ever did you ever bump into him at the CVS pharmacy buying baby oil or anything like that?
I think he had people that probably did that for him. But I do remember, I'm trying to think of
I
what
guess he
else.
did.
The neighborhood was, there weren't a lot of hip hop stars living on the Upper East Side at the time, so it was quite a it was very noticed that people were like, oh wow, because it was like some of the buildings, you couldn't actually, you had to like get through a committee to get into. That's how it works in Manhattan in some of these buildings. It's a called a co-op, right? So it's a cooperative. But the building that he bought was a condominium. It was just, you write the check, you can buy, and it was supposed to be apartments. He just bought the whole building. So yeah, Pete, and then they used that years later, I think, for, I never watched it, but like Making the Band or something. But I used to see Puff on the street all the time. I was like, yo, what's up, Puff? All
Wow.
true.
I got to tell you something, Mr. Sexton. I had no idea, first of all, that you were this posh. I had no idea. Look at you living in the lap of luxury in New York City as a young man. And now this whole celebrity connection. Although, frankly, I'd keep that under wraps at this stage of the game. But
I've got better celebrity stories. Anyway.
There can't be a better one than that. It's certainly not more timely. Anyway, look, okay, we're going to move on. I know that people tuned in for the P. Diddy news of the day, but I want to talk about, look, you follow this a lot more than I do, and you're extremely well versed on what's happening with U.S. politics right now. But I want to focus on it from the perspective of the foreign policy differences that exist. If Harris wins, if Trump wins, I know this is a really big playing field that I'm setting in front of you, but lay out what you see as the key differences between those two potential administrations from a foreign policy perspective.
Ooh. It's fascinating because this is one place where you've seen really a merger occur, Mike, of the old Cheney neocon wing of the Republican Party and the Democrat uniparty interventionists. I know that's kind of a lot of jargon, but effectively, the Democrat Party is the party of the machine state, and that includes certainly the federal bureaucracy, which you and I come out of, where we are anomalies, just so everybody knows. I mean, Mike was with the cool kids, but I was with the analysts and a bunch of like cringing betas down in the basement writing reports and stuff. They were all either Bernie Sanders or Kamala.
Wait a second.
Or
Hold on. I gotta stop you right there, man. The way you just described that makes it sound like it was the jocks and the nerds, or like somehow the ops guys were walking by giving you guys wedgies over in the DI, and that's not the way it works. No, that wasn't the way.
Case officers
while I
rolling
was
by
there.
there. Case officers are like, write me another report.
No,
Anyway.
we were always impressed. We were always impressed with how smart you guys were and how you could take some of the shit that we were collecting. Smart.
I will say my office, the Iraq office, which I worked in, not to get too far afield here, but the Iraq office, which you had to sort of like internally, you had to be chosen for it, like you had to apply, and because they were kind of sifting out, and you basically had to say, I'm willing to go to Iraq, I'll help any way I can. So the Iraq office was actually a lot of ex-mil guys. We had SF guys, we had Marine Recon who came in and were analysts. So I am kidding, but there are a lot of cringing mutants who are analysts. So that's in some of the other offices. Anyway, put that aside for a second. Back to the differences in the party, and where I see a huge amount of daylight. I mean, the Republican Party's, I think, most painful lesson of the last 20 years has been the legacy of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think that Donald Trump has been a big part of learning that lesson not just learning it, but applying it in a meaningful way in terms of the foreign policy philosophy of the right. It has moved not just to an America first posture, but to a highly non-interventionist posture, meaning unless there's a critical U.S. interest that will be achieved by the force of arms, we should not be involved. The Democrats do not take that perspective. The Democrats, as we know, whether it's the Obama administration and the numerous foreign policy debacles there, including their role in Libya, we all saw 13 hours, and what happened in Syria, the Syrian civil war. The beginning, I might add, of the Russia invasion of Ukraine was that people forget this, but it stretches back to well, I'm trying to remember even the year now. It's like 7 or 8 years going back now, and it also the seizure of Crimea occurred, through referendum under Barack Obama's tenure, right? So these are all lessons that I think have been reflected in the way Trump approaches things. With Kamala Harris, you get this. It's weird, right? Because on the one hand, you have all these beta males like the current Secretary of State Blinken and this multilateral international institution-based view of how the U.S. should operate in the world, but also the deployment of U.S. troops or U.S. materiel, money, in places where it's not really clear what our objective is. You can make sort of a human rights or human policy argument about it. So, do you know what I mean? I think that there's been a massive philosophical shift where the Democrats are now much more inclined to get us involved in military adventurism abroad that doesn't have a clear U.S. interest because they haven't learned the lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan and others. And so that's where I think the main switch is. And that's kind of a long answer, but I think it's an important topic.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually right on the money. If I'm not mistaken, I think Nikki Haley, when she was talking about her switch over to the Republican Party, said one of the reasons was because she felt the Democrats had become the party of war, and
yeah,
it is for those of us old enough to remember, it is quite the switch, in terms of how the parties are perceived on the international front when it comes to conflict. With Ukraine, there's a lot of talk about if Trump wins, right? What that means for Ukraine, what that means for the EU in terms of their support for Ukraine. How do you view that? Where do you think he would go with this?
I think that I know this is like a favorite topic of a lot of particularly I think the Never Trump right. I mean, they act like Trump's BFF relationship with Vladimir Putin is somehow both disqualifying for Trump to be commander-in-chief again, and then also goes to a lack of loyalty to America. I mean, I'm just saying that's the argument that certainly you get from Democrats on the Russia collusion and Putin stuff, but you also get that from sort of that old school Cheney interventionist Republican Bush era GWAT folks. And here's here's what I would say about the way that we can break all this stuff down. Russia. Yeah, Trump has this, I think you could call it a respect. He says it. He's told me that before in interviews. He has a respect for Putin's abilities. He's sort of a worthy adversary. But you look at what happened while Trump was president vis-a-vis Russia, right, Mike? You look at things like, I think it was 50 or 60 diplomats expelled from the U.S., which to a lot of people, that's like a who cares? That's in diplomatic relations. If you're going to talk about what the State Department can do, that's a pretty strong move. I'll give you something stronger than that, though. The Barack Obama's administration, and I debated Obama's national security advisor on Ukraine issues. I mean, it was like Eurasia, I forget. He was the National Security Council guy for Eurasia, focusing on Ukraine. Obama's team wouldn't give lethal munitions to Ukraine. And when the first invasion happened, right, they were sending blankets and helmets. Trump comes along, people forget this now, and actually says, okay, look, if we're going to do this, let's actually do this. Let's not, mess around. And he sent the Javelin missile system, which was critical, especially as the Russian armor was so far beyond the capabilities of the Ukrainians at that point to resist, and also sent long-range sniper rifles, which, as you know, Mike, the warfare over there is effectively trench warfare. It's like this hybrid of new tech with the drones and the digitized, our artillery. It's like a game of Risk with artillery shells going on and everyone using digitized communication to pinpoint accuracy. And then you have guys in trenches like it's the First World War. long-range rifles, Dragunov sniper rifles, things like that. Trump gave that to Ukraine. Obama wouldn't do it. So and then there's I want to call it 150 some odd Russian paramilitaries, Wagner Group guys that they took out in the Syrian desert. I mean, I know you know this, but I just think for people to hear this and remember, Trump is the guy that will bend over and do anything for Russia, but he's expelling the diplomats. He's giving lethal munitions to Ukraine, and he's giving the okay as commander in chief for operations that include blowing hundreds of Russians out of the sand. You know what I'm saying? So this is, I think, an important part of the history that people need to remember. And then for how this plays out for the EU, for NATO, and for the conflict right now with Ukraine and Russia, I would just say there's going to have to be a negotiated settlement, and Putin isn't going to negotiate. Putin is never going to feel pressure from the Democrat administration of Kamala Harris to do anything. I think he just views her as laughable. Honestly, I view her as laughable. I think that Joe Biden, even with senility, is a more formidable statesman, despite the dementia, than Kamala Harris is. I think with Donald Trump, you can sit down and say, look, what's it going to be to stop this? If you don't, I'm going to find ways to turn the heat up that actually bother you. Not enough that you're going to be able to get away with a major military escalation, but I'm going to make things hurt more. I can. Let's get a deal done. Let's stop the killing. That's how I see a Trump administration on Ukraine, Russia moving forward. And on NATO and EU stuff, they were saying this. Remember, Mike, the whole time. Oh, NATO allies need to pay more. He was right. He's right. One thing about Trump is you can't rip him off, right? I mean, whatever's in the contract, he's going to expect that money to get paid. You're not going to get away with that. And these European countries were getting a free ride, and he called them out, and he was right. But I don't see there as being any harm done to the transatlantic relationship or anything like that under Trump. If anything, I think that calling them to account strengthens things over the long term.
Yeah, I think you're pointing to an important part of this, which is people have to be able to look at what actually has happened, right? The facts, as opposed to the political narrative. But I don't know that we live in an environment where that happens very often right now, because, I mean, obviously, the Democrats have been banging this same drum for some time, right? Trump is a Putin puppet. Trump is going to get us out of important international alliances. He's going to stop support for Ukraine, whatever it is. But again, I think you've laid out very, very clearly that if people just look, we're in a very unique situation here going into this election, right? We've got a candidate on the Democrat side who we know from now almost 4 years as vice president and working within the Biden-Harris administration, and we've got an individual who was president for 4 years that we can look at a track record, right? That almost would mean that people are obligated. They have to step back and say, let's look at the facts of those two administrations, of those two periods of time, and just discard the political narratives, which are just flying around. And now they're getting crazy. This last 2 weeks are going to be insane. But I will get off my soapbox right now. Buck, we've got some tremendous sponsors. We're going to have to listen to just a few of them. And so if you'll stay where you are, we'll be right back after this quick break. Hey, Mike Baker here. Look, if you're tired of the same old coffee from those mega corporations, you know the ones I mean, pushing their agendas, well, listen up. It's time to take a stand and support a brand that truly embodies American values. And of course, here I'm talking about Blackout Coffee. They stand with hardworking Americans who believe in family, faith, and freedom. And here's a bonus. They roast some of the most incredible coffee you'll ever taste, using only premium grade beans, roasted and shipped to you within 48 hours. Think about that. The beans are in the roaster, and then suddenly they're at your house in their mug. Bob's your uncle. For the cold brew fans, Blackout Coffee is now also excited to announce the launch of their 2 new ready-to-drink cold brew coffee latte options. That's not easy to say. Don't settle for less. Make the switch to Blackout Coffee. Head over to blackoutcoffee.com/PDB and use the code PDB for 20% off your first order. That's blackoutcoffee.com/PDB, and the code is, oddly enough, PDB. Look, join the movement and taste the difference. Remember, with every sip, you're supporting a brand that stands for America. And as we say around here, be awake, not woke. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Joining me once again is the co-host of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show, former CIA officer and man about town, Buck Sexton. Buck, earlier we were talking about what you perceive as a top line, the 30,000-foot view on the differences between a potential Harris administration and a Trump administration from a foreign policy perspective. We were talking about Ukraine in particular. I want to get your opinion on some recent news that's come out. And that is that North Korea, Kim Jong-un, right, in his growing bromance with Putin, reportedly has dispatched possibly thousands, some reporting points up to 10,000, North Korean soldiers to not only train in Russia, but to serve on the front lines next to Russian troops in the fight against the Ukrainians. Do you think the reporting is accurate, credible? What do you make of this, and what's the potential for a real problem should they get in the firing line?
This is really interesting to me because it brings a few things together. One is that any move that North Korea makes at some level is approved of and okayed by China, right? So this is whenever you're talking Russia, North Korea, you're also these three things connect, right? China could effectively cut off and starve out North Korea more than it's already being starved, unfortunately, tomorrow if they wanted to, right? Without the assistance of the Chinese state and the willingness of the Chinese state to allow North Korea to exist, it would effectively just wither up and become absolutely nothing. But back to so I just think that's worth noting as you talk about the Russia-North Korea relationship. I'm also wondering how Xi Jinping and Putin are talking. Like, there's no way this is happening without Xi's knowledge, and I would argue probably his acceptance of this. This is just not a thing that would occur without there being a few players involved, in my opinion. As to the North Koreans getting involved, there's like a good news, bad news component of this, right? The thing is, at least when you're dealing with North Korea and Russia, normally with North Korea, if they're sending troops somewhere, like if the North Koreans were sending people to go help out in Hamas against Israel, right, in Gaza, you've got advanced missile technology, you've got nuclear technology, you've got things that all of a sudden you wonder, like, hold on a second, is there a proliferation concern here, a nuclear proliferation concern? Obviously, Russia has, I think, more nukes still than we do. It's got thousands of nukes. So that's not a part of it that's concerning to me. The part that is perhaps encouraging, maybe, although, I don't know. I mean, we're now just like looking at body counts as encouraging, is if they're going to rely on North Korean special operations troops. My understanding is that they're also trying to have them, they're going to put them in units that are comprised of Eastern Siberian Russians, right? And Russia covers something like, what is it, Mike? Is it 9 time zones or something? Some crazy number, 11 time zones. I don't even know. If you go far east enough in Russia, the Russians look kind of like Chinese and Koreans. A lot of them, right? This is just a fact of the geography. So they're trying to take these North Koreans and put them in indigenous Russian units, and then have it look, to make it seem like they're not necessarily, because if they have to call upon North Korea to do their fighting, what does that mean about their manpower concerns? And I think that's what is, again, like, I just want the bloodshed to stop and the fighting to stop. I don't want any more Ukrainians going home in body bags. I don't want Russian reservists being called up from all over Russia to fight in a war that, they feel duty bound to fight in, but they have, no hatred of the Ukrainians and no interest in getting killed. So I think that there's obviously a lot of loss that has been sustained by the Russians, and they're going to second and third tier manpower reserves to do it. The part of it that I guess is just concerning to me is whenever you're involved, you're sort of strengthening this non-aligned axis. And as I said, China is always in the background of anything North Korea is doing. And so you got Russia, China, and they've been, obviously, Xi Jinping and Putin, because of the sanctions, have gotten a lot closer. There's been a lot. So once you start pulling all these entities together, that to me is not good for the rest of the world. Like, I can't give a specific why that's going to translate into something that's of greater concern to us, other than you don't want all your enemies feeling like their backs are together and they're facing out against everyone else. And I think there's more and more of that going on right now. I mean, do you see the North Korean manpower thing the same way? I just view it as, if Russia was kicking ass and not worried about it, they wouldn't be calling on North Korean spec. Because really, it's not like they bring some advantage to this, right? It's not like the old school, you're a classics guy too, Mike. They're not bringing slingers in from the Balearic Islands or Welsh longbowmen or some kind of like new. It's dudes with guns. We're going to be in trenches and operate, and trying to shoot each other at distance, basically, and operate some drones, first person view drones.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of layers to this. One of them is Putin is loath to do another conscription, right? He really needs to avoid that, and so I think, and from a North Korean perspective, look, it gives Kim, he gets an opportunity to send some of his troops and get some real world battle experience, right? And so there's and also, again, everything that Putin's doing basically is designed to prop up his economy and his war machine. I think without North Korea, without Iran, without China, without India in terms of energy, Putin, I don't believe, would have been able to survive the past 3 years. Right? He's essentially selling cheap energy and weapons technology in order to keep his war machine ticking along. And he's got a handful of comrades in that effort. And I agree with you. I don't think there's any way that Xi Jinping woke up one morning, read the headlines and said, "What? You got to be kidding me. There's North Korean troops in Russia?" Yeah, of course he knew. And
he might have helped
in terms of,
he might have helped negotiate the deal, Mike. Yeah. Honestly, he might have been like, "All right, you talk to Kim, let's get this going."
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, look, from the Chinese regime's perspective, the one thing that they definitely don't want, and it sort of drives their strategy with North Korea, is the idea of millions of North Koreans streaming across the border in the event of a hot conflict with South Korea, right? That chaos. Yeah. So there's a lot of complexity to this, and sometimes the unfortunate reality is that in today's world, everybody wants a very immediate beginning, middle, end story, right? And so I do worry that, that because we've all got ADHD, right? We're all chasing the next shiny object, that when it comes to things like, choosing your next president, I think people need to take the time, right, to do a little bit of this research and to understand the complexity.
I didn't get to. Sorry, we're having a little.
There's a little delay, yeah. So does this involve P. Diddy again or no? No.
I promise.
I'm just asking.
Let me go on the record. That is my only P. Diddy story that I already shared. There's no other P. Diddy stories. Okay. When I was a young CIA guy, I never got invited to a party at a mansion anywhere, anything like that. No, I
tell you something. I'm trying to talk
you bring that up during your. Mike won't let me. Can you see this?
Look, you bring that up. You bring up the P. Diddy story during your initial entrance polygraph. You're not getting in, so I assume you kept that to yourself. There you go.
Yeah. Well, you got to remember, back in the day, P. Diddy used to hang out with, the Hillary and the Obamas, Anna Wintour. He was the toast of the town, man. He was considered the big. Now, oh my God. I mean, innocent until proven guilty, but it's looking pretty bad. So wait, okay.
Hey, can I ask you? Let me ask you a question, Buck. Sorry, I keep interrupting you, but you know what? This is the PDB Situation Report with Mike Baker. So I'm not going back to the Diddy. What I did want to ask you was, because we mentioned the agency again, and this is completely off topic, but I'm really enjoying this conversation. What possessed you to apply to the agency? What was your motivation? What drove you there?
So funny. Tom Clancy books, 9/11, and not wanting to be some Wall Street stooge. That's really it. All those three things together. I mean, 9/11 happened, and I had a grandfather who was in the military. I mean, who was in the Navy in World War II. I mean, a lot of people obviously had grandparents who served in that war, or grandfathers who served in that war. But we didn't have any military or anything like that in my family. So I kind of thought, I was like, maybe I'll do military. It just felt, I went to Amherst, and it was one of these schools where we're talking early 2000s, obviously. I'm talking about 9/11. There's like the whole school was just one, other than the drinking and the partying and everything, which, I mean, college is mostly a joke. I mean, people pretend like it's not, but for 90% of the people who go, it's like socializing and just getting through it and then actually trying to be a real productive member of the human race. But everyone was trying to go, Mike, into investment banking or consulting. I mean, that was, yeah, there were some people that went to law school, wanted the corporate lawyer thing. I mean, there were some people that did Teach for America, and they had some stories. But for the most part, it was just everyone wanted to go to McKinsey or Goldman, and how do you get there as fast as you can? And I just felt like, I mean, look, after 9/11 happened, I'm a kid who, like I said, I love the Tom Clancy books. I just, on my own, I would just go, Tom Clancy. I've talked about this on my radio show before, but Tom Clancy and Michael Crichton were sort of my first experiences. This was in grade school, so I don't know if like a lot of fifth graders are reading this stuff, but I like to read. And those are my first experience of like, instead of watching TV or movies or something, I was like, I want to go read my Tom Clancy book. Like, I just thought he was amazing, And so that was really how I learned about the CIA. No one had ever talked about the CIA in my house or anything like that. I had seen Patriot games. I knew there was this thing called the agency. I had read a book or two on the agency. I'm trying to remember Kessler. You remember Kessler's book on the CIA? I read this guy Kessler, he was a journalist, not an agency guy, but he kind of did a top to bottom. I read Scheuer's Imperial Hubris, if you remember that one about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's not going to end well, and he actually was right. So anyway, I kind of just found my way into it post 9/11. It felt like trying to just be some guy who's better at spreadsheets and sitting in an office for 80 hours a week, like wasn't interesting to me anymore. And I was the first, Mike, I can tell you, it was the first job I applied for senior year, and it was the job that I wanted. And yeah, I got my conditional offer that summer after graduation, and it was off to the races. So just got started.
That's great. That's fantastic. It's stunning how from so many people, right? 9/11 was essentially seen as a call to duty, to honorable duty, and whether it was the military, whether it was the CIA, whether it was wherever, it was the motivating factor for a lot of folks that I know.
Can I just say, Mike, I think that a lot of people now think of it in terms of, we had to go get the bad guys there, so they, so for sort of justice purposes. But you also, I know you remember this, the mindset was actually, what's next? Like, what are they going to hit us with next? There was a real sense when they can run those planes into the buildings as they did, kill almost 3,000 people in one day. And the agency was involved in some of it. And obviously special operations community was real busy in those early GWAT years all over the world. There were other mass casualty plots underway. Like we were, I think that people lose that sense of urgency now, right? They lose that sense of, 9/11 happened, but then like we did these things and these wars, and we eventually got bin Laden. And the story was really much more, 9/11 happened, like, when's the next 9/11 going to happen? When's the next? And is it going to be 10,000 people? Is it going to be 100,000 people? Is it going to be a dirty bomb? Now, maybe some of that got to the point of almost too much anxiety, maybe even a hysteria. But that was a very widespread sentiment after what we saw. And I'll just say, I think that's how the Israeli people now feel, rightly so, after October 7th, right? It's on now.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think, and I want to have you back to focus on the Middle East at some point here in the near future. But yeah, you're right. I mean, look, the sad fact is that it takes a tragic event. It takes a moment like a 9/11 or like a 7 October to create this unity, right? I mean, that was one of the striking things after that. It was one of those few moments, I think, for people in that time to experience what occurred during World War II, as an example, where we were all Americans. It didn't matter, what political party you were in. There were, that divide just shrunk all of a sudden. People were back into the center and working together.
You knew this from the agency side. I mean, it's people ask me, they're like, how could you? Because now in recent years, because of like Russia collusion and complete jerks like what Clapper and these other guys have come out and made fools of themselves in the media, and the laptop is fake and all this stuff that we've seen, hyper partisan stuff from these guys. Not all of them have done it, but a lot of the recent directors and everything else. people ask me like, how could you have ever worked at the CIA? I was like, in 2004, 2005, when I was getting in the game, it was like we're working here because we need to stop them from blowing up our planes and buildings and killing women and children. And like it was a very clear sense of mission, to your point. And then nobody was showing up there. It wasn't like some partisan crybaby fest about like, well, your side and who's your president. Like that stuff was really very much in the background. And I think unfortunately that, from what I hear, is not as much the case these days, but it certainly was the case then.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's hard to recall those feelings, right, in today's hyper-partisan world. But listen, Buck, this is I really enjoyed this conversation. It's been a real pleasure, and I want to say, listen, thank you for taking the time. Buck Sexton, co-host, as you know, as everyone knows, of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. You know, frankly, I would make it the Buck Sexton and Clay Travis Show. I don't know how you got second billing, but
he's
you know,
he's older. We go
age
before beauty.
Oh,
he's older.
Okay, there you go. That makes sense. Just think about that though when you're re-upping your contract. Just think about the changing that around. Anyway, listen, thanks very much for joining us. When we call you back, I hope you come back.
Thanks so much. Anytime, man. Great to be with you, Mike. Thank you.
Go. Talk to you soon. Take care, man. Well, all right. Look, coming up next, China flexes its muscles in the Far East, engaging in large-scale military exercises surrounding the island of Taiwan in what it called a warning against independence. Author Gordon Chang, our good friend, gives us his analysis when we come back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Now's the time to protect your retirement savings, right? That's an important thing to talk about. And Patriot Gold Group, well, is here to help. Did you know that just recently, Goldman Sachs raised their target for gold to $2,900 an ounce by early 2025? Plus, silver has outperformed gold in 2024, up 32%, and is at an 11-year high. JP Morgan forecasts silver to hit $36 an ounce in early 2025. And of course, the most contested election in history is next month. You probably heard about it. So why wait? Call the proud Americans of the Patriot Gold Group today, before it's too late. Mention PDB, and you'll always get best-in-class service from Patriots protecting Patriots. Patriot Gold Group has the No Fee for Life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver. And you may be eligible for the No Fee for Life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Call 1-888-870-5457 for a free investor guide. And Patriot Gold Group, this is important, is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer for 7 years in a row. That's a lot of years in a row. Call 1-888-870-5457. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. China's President Xi Jinping was in Russia this week, attending the annual BRICS Summit alongside leaders from 24 countries. Now, the BRICS group originally comprised of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And if you take the first letter from each of those countries, it cleverly spells BRICS. Among others now, because they've expanded the group, aims to strengthen economic and political ties among nations, seeking to counterbalance Western dominance on the global stage. This year's summit saw discussions on expanding membership, boosting trade through alternative currencies, and reducing reliance on the U.S. dollar, all central to challenging Western power and hegemony. Notably, this summit comes just 1 week after China's military engaged in provocative large-scale exercises around Taiwan, during which Chinese warships and aircraft encircled the island in a clear show of force. Beijing called it a, quote, warning to Taipei, reiterating its stance that Taiwan is part of China's sovereign territory and that any move toward formal independence would not be tolerated. The timing of these two events, the military drills and Xi's participation in the BRICS Summit, reflects China's two-pronged strategy, asserting its power militarily in its immediate region, while diplomatically strengthening alliances to challenge Western influence globally. Now, for more on this, let me bring in our friend Gordon Chang. He's the author of the brand new book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon, thank you very much for joining us again today on the Situation Report.
Thanks, Mike.
First of all, congratulations on the book. It is a little alarming, and when I say a little alarming, I mean it's very alarming. Tell us sort of top line, 30,000 foot, the reasons why you wrote the book and kind of what you want people to take away from it, if you could.
Yeah. American leaders and policymakers fundamentally misunderstand China's assault on the American Republic. So, for instance, you've got President Biden saying, oh, we can cooperate with China in areas where we have common interests. Well, no, you can't have common interests with a regime that is trying to destroy your country. And that's unfortunately the situation. The Communist Party believes it is in an existential struggle with the United States. And it's because not of anything that we say or do, but because of who we are. An insecure regime in Beijing is worried about the inspirational impact of our values and form of governance on the Chinese people, which means that we will never have amicable relations with China as long as the party rules it. And that also means there's only going to be one survivor. It'll either be the People's Republic of China or the United States of America, not both. I know that Americans don't want to confront that, but if we don't confront that, we're going to lose our country.
It's interesting because you're essentially saying, and we've talked about this before, but you've laid it out in this book that we're running on, the two countries are running on two separate tracks, where the U.S. Tends to think that we're in a competitive stance with China, but yet we somehow have mutually shared interests at times, and somehow exist in this same community of nations. And what you're saying about the Chinese regime is they're essentially on a war footing.
Yes, and they've made it very clear. May 2019, People's Daily, which is the most authoritative publication in China. When People's Daily speaks, that's China speaking. May 2019, People's Daily carried a landmark editorial declaring a people's war on America. Now, people's war is a phrase which has great resonance in Communist Party thought. It's total war, as the PLA Daily, an official publication of the Chinese military, told us last year. Total war. And that means things like fentanyl. That's just not criminal activity. That's the Communist Party trying to kill Americans, which means that somewhere between 70 and 75,000 Americans each year who die from doses of illicit Chinese fentanyl, they are murdered. And we have a political system that will not come to that conclusion, which means China will continue to kill tens of thousands of Americans each year.
And I think also that the ways in which, again, to use this concept of the regime is at war or on war footing, the various ways in which they're doing this. It's not, people shouldn't just think of it as we're going to get in this kinetic war, this hot war with China, perhaps over Taiwan, but they're engaged in a variety of things, whether it's cyber shenanigans, whether it's disinformation, whether it's impacting elections at a local and a state level. And that to me, I mean, look, one of the things that I do is I run a company that does a lot of work around the world, collecting information, investigations, and we have seen over the recent past, we've seen instances where the Chinese regime is trying to impact local, meaning city and state policies and regulations, because I think they've realized that it may be tough to change federal policy in the U.S. Through various means, but if they can work through cutouts, if they can work through seemingly unconnected organizations at a state or local or a federal or a city level, then they can impact regulations, whether it means for mining, energy, agriculture, whatever it is, and those things benefit the Chinese regime in a way.
Yes, and this election cycle, China is very active down ballot. So, for instance, in June in New York State, they were trying to affect the outcomes in Democratic Party primaries. And that shows you to the extent that China's involvement is pervasive. This time, they're also trying to disrupt the United States by using fake posters, talking about all sorts of divisive issues to get the American people to fight among themselves. And we know that Iran actually hacked the Trump campaign and gave the material to Harris's. So they've been involved. And, when you go back to 2020, China actually was extremely decisive. They supported Biden over Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primaries. They supported Biden over Trump in the general election, and they got exactly what they wanted.
Okay, Gordon, if you'd stay right there, we've got some sponsors. We're going to take just a quick break. Gordon Chang, author of the brand new book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Hang with us, Gordon. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Joining me once again is the author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, Gordon Chang. Gordon, when you look at the upcoming election, you've probably heard about it. We're going to have this election in the U.S. coming up in a little less than 2 weeks. From a perspective of how a Harris administration would deal with the Chinese regime or a Trump administration would deal with the Chinese regime, can you lay out what you would see as the principal differences, the pros and cons?
Yeah, Harris, we know, is not interested in foreign affairs. So she basically doesn't have principles when it comes to China. But also we know that every American president, when they start out, gives China a grace period. Sometimes it's months, sometimes it's more. But she was probably going to do that. Now, Trump, who's already been president, who's already been burned by the Chinese, is probably not going to give them much of a grace period, if anything at all. The other difference on the Harris campaign is that they've got a guy named Tim Walz, who looks like a communist sympathizer. And we know this from his continuous contact with the Communist Party's United Front Work Department, contact which he had in the 1990s and which has continued through his being governor of Minnesota. So this covers now spanning 4 decades. With Trump, Trump does a lot of things the Chinese actually like. But the point is, they don't want him anywhere near the Oval Office because he does a lot of things they don't like. And also, most important, he's unpredictable. The Chinese can deal with a hostile American president, but they can't deal with someone they think they cannot control. And they know that they cannot control Trump. And this is something that we saw going back to April 2017 when Xi Jinping was actually at Mar-a-Lago, and over that most beautiful piece of chocolate cake, Trump stands up and says, "I've just ordered a missile strike on Syria," which is a Chinese friend. And Xi Jinping was completely flummoxed. And by the way, he was relatively well behaved for the 4 years of the Trump administration. And as soon as Biden took over, the Chinese went on a rampage.
Well, I mean, to be fair to Tim Walz, wasn't he in Tiananmen Square? Didn't he stand in front of the tanks? I don't remember what the story was.
And he doesn't either.
Okay.
Actually, he's actually lied to the American people about it. I mean, he actually said that he was in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen massacre. When he wasn't even in Hong Kong, he didn't come until August of 1989. And I don't know how he could have misremembered that, because that is something that was graphic. I mean, we all know, people who were in Hong Kong in 1989, they knew where they were when they heard about Tiananmen Square. Tim Walz was just lied consistently about his relations with China to the American people. And I'm not a Republican, but I can say that his presence on the ticket means that no American should vote for Harris, because Tim Walz looks like a communist, and he'll be just one heartbeat away from the Oval Office. And God forbid, he actually could end up being president of the United States.
Yeah. Although I'm not sure that facts anymore count that much when it comes to U.S. politics. I just don't know. I think we're in a dysfunctional state, and I'm not sure how we walk that dog back. But that's me being cynical, and I don't want to disappear down that rabbit hole. Gordon, let's talk about, if you could, the recent military exercises that China just engaged in around Taiwan. Now, it came kind of hot on the heels of the Taiwanese president giving a National Day speech. And of course, they refer to him as a dangerous separatist. But do you think that the military exercises, were they reactionary to that, or were these a long time in the planning and they're part of a bigger picture, a longer term strategy? And also, what's your takeaway from this? I mean, is that, I guess what I'm really asking here, Gordon, is, and this is almost impossible to answer, is what's that timeline look like? We've talked about this before. In terms of Taiwan, how do you perceive a timeline for Xi acting on their ambitions?
On your first question, it wasn't reactionary to President Li's 10/10 speech. That's the National Day in Taiwan. I mean, these things had to be planned long time in advance, and these occurred just 4 days after that speech, which is actually quite a mild one. What we have seen over the last week, because that was Monday and Tuesday of last week. Then on Tuesday of this week were the live fire drills in the Taiwan Strait. Last Thursday, we heard from state media that Xi Jinping was giving a pep talk to the rocket force, which controls almost all of the country's nuclear weapons, where he's saying that they need to be ready for combat, which is an implied threat to start a nuclear war. So the timeline can be anytime. Now, Taiwan officials have been telling visiting foreigners that they expect China to impose a quarantine on Taiwan within 6 months. So that's sort of like the outer limit. Because when they institute a quarantine, they're going to probably fail at that, which means that they need a blockade. That's an act of war. Blockade brings in Japan for various reasons. Japan brings in us. So, that is your outer edge. But, generally speaking, we should be prepared for anything at any place at any time, because this regime in Beijing is under a lot of internal pressure. Xi Jinping can take us by surprise, and we are not thinking about this in the way that the Chinese are. They talk about war all the time. They're preparing for it. We got a Biden who just couldn't care less. He's just checked out.
Look, we've got so much more that we could talk about, and I've got a long list of questions I'd like to throw your way, but I want to be mindful of your time. And so I hope when we knock on your door again, you'll open the door and come back. Gordon Chang, author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. If you don't have your copy, go get one. Thank you so much for joining us again today, and look forward to talking to you again soon, hopefully, Gordon.
Yeah, I would love to do that, Mike. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you, man. Well, that is all the time we have for today's PDB Situation Report. Look, if you have any questions, or comments or humorous anecdotes that you'd like me to talk about on the air, reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. The mailroom at the PDB's global corporate headquarters is absolutely chock full of overstuffed mailbags containing your questions and your pithy comments and your suggestions. And once a month, what we do is a select group of PDB executives. They gather in the conference room, they choose a batch of your questions, and then we mash them all into an episode that we call Ask Me Anything. So please keep your cards and letters coming. To listen to the podcast of this show ad-free, become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. It could not be any easier. And remember, you can find us at The First TV, on our YouTube channel, when that's at President's Daily Brief, and of course, all the podcast platforms where you get your podcast stuff. Thank you very much again for being part of the PDB community. I'm Mike Baker, and until next time, well, you know the drill. Stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.